The views expressed in this interview are those of the individuals and do not reflect the official policy or position of the U.S. government, the Department of Defense, the U.S. Navy, or the Naval Postgraduate School. Welcome to the Trident Room, brewer of stout conversation, unfiltered and on tap. In today's episode, Trident Room host Marcus Antonellis sits down and has a conversation with NPS student Ben Cohen.
All right, hey, good afternoon, Trident Room podcast listeners. Lieutenant Antonellis back again, this time today with Captain Ben Cohen, who's an NPS student here, getting his degree in Defense System Analysis and a degree in Applied Design for Innovation. He's a Marine Corps Logistics Officer, and we're really happy to have him here today. We're going to talk about some great topics, the environment, sustainable farming, policy, global warming, all sorts of fun stuff. So I'm going to turn it over to him for some introductory comments, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. I appreciate you having me on. Excited to give a chat. I know we connected after the virtual senior guest lecture series with Mr. Brian, and it's been a good conversation so far, and looking forward to continuing that.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Yeah, thanks. Again, super happy to have you. It was really awesome that we were able to connect. Kind of the stars sort of aligned there. It's funny, I submitted one of the guest questions as a member of the audience, and you were a panel member, and I was lucky enough to have you ask it for me. I think my friend Dylan Bonnet sort of hooked it up there. I think he might have shot you a message and asked you to ask that question or something.
Dylan's good people.
Yeah,
great time with him.
It's good. Yeah, Dylan's a good guy. But anyway, so before I hit the record button, we were talking about your time as an undergrad at the Citadel, and you were able to achieve some pretty cool in my mind, achievements there with some sustainable farming and these sort of vertical farming systems. So why don't you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so for years, growing up in the Pacific Northwest, just being outdoors and having some sort of relationship with the environment around you was always really important. And so did some enlisted time in the Marine Corps, got selected for a commissioning program, went down to Charleston to the Citadel, not as a cadet, but as an active duty Marine, which is a very interesting opportunity in itself. But Marine MECEPs down there are afforded some tremendous freedom of movement. We're trusted. We do a lot for the school. We support the school. And so I had an opportunity to explore an idea that had been of interest to me for a while, and that was sustainable farming. In particular, vertical farming options, which is all under the umbrella of controlled environment agriculture. So we're talking about hydroponics, we're talking about aeroponics, aquaponics, a lot of fancy terms for farming. And so I started pitching the idea to folks, just kind of asking, hey, I'm interested in doing this. Can I do this? Is it a degree thing? How would I poke around? And I was getting a business degree there with a focus in supply chain management, but was kind of left to my own devices. And so as I asked more and more people about, hey, I've had this interest in sustainable farming, I'd kind of like to poke around with it, more folks at the Citadel, more staff members and faculty kept saying, hey, talk to this person, talk to this person, talk to this person. Eventually got connected to the STEM director, and we had a pretty good mind meld and said, hey, this is a really cool thing. We want to do this. And so what we tried to develop was an interdisciplinary project that brought a controlled environment agriculture farm in a box to the Citadel that was cadet run, managed, and executed, all with the intent of feeding the entire undergraduate body at the Citadel. And so we got really lucky because there was a company in Charleston, Tiger Corner Farms, that had just started some work in building these container farms, essentially. So a standard ISO 8-foot by 40-foot container, and they were putting the equivalent of a 3-acre farm inside these ISO containers. They donated two to us after we kind of laid out the plan for them. We found some cadets that were interested, and when I left the school in August 2016, those containers were providing the majority of the leafy greens for the school.
That's amazing. That's such a cool accomplishment. You don't hear a lot of stories like that. How a MECEP going through their commissioning program brought a sustainable farm to a college campus. So that's very, very impressive. You're showing me some of the technologies. These are very cool, very high tech technologies. And we were talking a little bit. This is similar to what they have going on the space station, where they're testing sort of these nutrient envelopes to grow these plants in, foreign environments, or foreign relative to the current state of general farming.
Yeah, and so it's an interesting connection you make with the International Space Station, what was happening. So one of the selling points I actually used at the Citadel as I continued briefing higher and higher up the chain, eventually reaching the president of the Citadel and the board of directors, the board of trustees, was, hey, one, you can be the first military college in the U.S. to start growing your own food. That's a bragging point the next time you run to the superintendents of the other institutions. But also, this is technology that's going to pave the way for us to move forward. And I used the existing commercial market in Charleston and then talking about the future of, hey, when we potentially start to colonize Mars, this is where we're going to end up. This is the technology that's going to take us there. And it doesn't take much to convince people once they understand how simple that sustainable farming technology actually is. It looks advanced, but in truth, it's been around since Babylon, almost 7,000 years ago.
Wow, that's incredible. And then so I guess continuing down the line of extreme environments, talking about the ISS and Mars, you also said there was a pretty interesting application here in the Arctic. And that ties into some of your thesis work as well. So do you want to peel back some of the layers of that onion for us?
Yeah, so the Arctic is obviously an unforgiving environment. It's very difficult to do a lot up there. And if we use Alaska as the U.S. connection to the Arctic, obviously, aside from the tremendous drilling operations that go on in the northern slope up there near Barrow and Prudhoe Bay, growing anything in Alaska is very difficult. And so one of the really interesting applications is that these self-contained farms can be transported to anywhere in the world. And Alaska is an excellent example, and they can be insulated appropriately and emplaced and can use alternative energy sources if not plugged into a ground-based power source and be producing all year round. So you're able to bring a fresh and ready food supply to an area that is otherwise very difficult to get to. And even in lower parts of Alaska, small towns like Sitka and Juneau, Ketchikan, to get fresh leafy greens requires a barge trip of 3 or 4 days coming up from Seattle, and so the product they receive is not great. And even though we're talking about lettuce, types of leafy greens, varieties of lettuce or herbs, that's still pretty important to people. And so there's a morale factor that comes in with that. But you can implant these systems anywhere. You can grow all year round and control your food supply, which has significant ripple effects on the supply chain required to move that around. And because you can do it all year round, you can manage your own food supply in a way that wasn't achievable before.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I think definitely as the Arctic becomes more and more of a contested area of the globe with China and Russia as the ice caps and the continue to melt and sea lanes open up more and more as they turn their eyes to that part of the globe. I definitely think that's going to be more and more of a technology that we need to get behind so we can support our people up there and get ahead of our adversaries in regards to that technology as well.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And certainly not going to say that farming is the technology that will change the world in that aspect, but it's one of the drivers that supports our capability to function up there. Energy in the Arctic is a real problem. It's a problem that NPS has a great opportunity to engage with and other organizations to say, hey, we can find better solutions for this without burning as many fossil fuels as we currently do. As China and Russia's always been focused on the Arctic for obvious reasons. They own 50% of the coastline up there. China has declared itself a near Arctic player, and the justification for that is that as the ice melts and the Arctic sea routes open, China's Polar Silk Road affords them much faster access to 75% of the world. So while the really interesting tie-in to a lot of this is that the global climate is heavily affected by our soil. And so that's actually where containerized farming or controlled environment agriculture becomes an interesting part of that conversation, because believe it or not, how we farm in Kansas has an impact on the Arctic. And it's not to get too deep in the weeds about it, but containerized farming allows our soil an opportunity to take a break, which improves our carbon capture capabilities, because that's essentially what our soil is designed to do if it's healthy and functioning properly.
Right, similar to all the algae in the ocean.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Turning CO2 into oxygen.
We're going to need it.
Yeah, we're always going to need that. Yeah, that's awesome. So then we sort of talked a little bit about these delivery methods that you're sort of working on now here at MPS. Those are pretty cool. Why don't you tell us about those?
Right. So it's been fun for the past few months to try and convince people that bringing a technology that is older than fixed-wing flight back to the forefront is going to be worth our investment and our energy. So I'm looking into hybrid airships, which are very, very, very large blimps. Hybrid airships have a combined buoyant gas and aerodynamic design with thrust vectoring propulsion. So this combination affords like tremendous payload capacities. This is a technology that we pursued primarily between 2007 and 2012. The DoD put a lot of money into this. Unfortunately, sequestration hit those programs early on, so we kind of lost out on that. But it's something that both Russia and China are very interested in. And the reason is because these aircraft will have, I should say, tremendous payload capacities. So in excess of 100 tons, for instance. So for reference, a C-17 can carry just over 80 tons. So 100 tons is already more than a C-17 can carry, but these aircraft will be able to carry potentially more than 500 tons. It'll take a little time for the market to get to that point, but they are able to access austere and remote locations. So China, in particular, is very interested in this because the access to precious materials necessary for electric vehicle components, for instance, is not easy to gain access to without investing significant amounts of money in the infrastructure. So these aircraft let us bypass the ports and the airfields and the infrastructure requirements to get to those precious materials. You can bring in all the equipment necessary to get at it, and you can bring the product out with the same airships. So it changes the economic game quite a bit. And as the Arctic melts, we get more and more access to those resources. You don't have to put as much effort gaining access. There's plenty of oil up there, and everybody knows that, but there's an estimated $1 trillion of rare earth materials that are found within the Arctic Circle itself. Russia doesn't care. They'll just chomp through anything they feel the urge to get to. And they actually view global warming as a win for them. They're excited that things are melting because they can do more with their sea lanes and their shipping. So the kind of connection to all of this is that the impacts on the Arctic, which are, the Arctic is warming 2 times faster than the rest of the globe is, are going to be felt on both a political scale and an economic scale very, very quickly. And how we respond to that is important, but the actions that we take outside of the Arctic actually have interesting implications on what happens in the Arctic. So it's an evolving game, and it's an evolving game in an area where I think we can poke around a bit and learn quite a bit along the way. The trick will be, I think, probably having and I'm saying this as a very lowly member of the policymaking chain. How do we convince the global stage that we're not doing this, we're not encouraging a reduction in use of fossil fuels, and we're not encouraging the Arctic to be left alone to dissuade our foes from getting it before we do. That, I think, is going to be an interesting piece of this conversation. How do we avoid conflict?
Yeah, that's a good point you bring up, and I think a lot of people oftentimes overlook the environment as an aspect of policymaking. And I think, especially now, given the tipping point we are approaching when it comes to climate change, I think now more than ever, we need to look at the environment not just as hey, we need to do this just because it's a nice thing to do, but we need to do this because, hey, this affects implications on every single political front. Because if China and Russia can have free reign over that area and just extract whatever they want from there, that's going to affect every aspect of our life here at home. It's going to affect Europe, it's going to affect Africa, it's going to affect Far East, it's going to affect everywhere. And I think the conversation we're having here needs to be had at dinner tables or throughout the country, just so people can, hey, this isn't just, oh, I'm buying this at the grocery store. It's, hey, where's this actually coming from? What is the implication of this? And wait a minute, down the road, how's this really going to affect the long-term impact on our planet?
Yeah, and I think that's Marcus, that's a really interesting question to kind of go down, because that's a very large concept and topic for a lot of folks to talk about. Even in the military, I'm not in Southern California having conversations about what goes on in the Arctic. on a routine basis, nor am I having routine conversations with folks about where did my food come from and why should I care about where it came from. But it's an interesting interconnected piece, and I think kind of what, as you were talking, I'm thinking a phrase that I hear a lot, which is think globally, act locally, and so my focus has turned to, without going completely off the deep end, is, hey, what are my actions doing, and how can I be aware of it, and how does it fit into a slightly larger sphere than just myself? And sustainable farming is a good first approach to that conversation, because the positive implications on the food, the soil, and the supply chain, I think, can be seen and measured and quantified pretty quickly. But also because it starts a really interesting conversation about sustainability in general. I wasn't ever actually all that interested in the larger sustainability conversation, aside from we need to protect the earth in a very general sense, until I got into controlled environment agriculture, and it led me down some other interesting paths about the impacts and implications that we have. And as DoD policy is now pushing us towards being aware of our impact on the climate and having to adopt some practices down the road, some innovations that will require us to be more aware of it, we're going to have to find new ways to maneuver around that. And that's a really intimidating thought. And when I started thinking about containerized farming, it was a really, it was almost overwhelming to think there's no way I'm going to convince the entire U.S. military that this is a good idea. But it can be done here locally. The school can adopt containerized farming and make that small of an impact and encourage the community to do the same thing. And we can potentially take this technology and put it on our expeditionary vehicle, or our expeditionary ships, I should say, or deploy these systems with units when we send them overseas, because that reduces our reliance on supply chains around the world. And it reduces our footprint in small and simple ways. And so I've been interested in the route that it's taken me, and use it as a stepping stone to understand sustainability as a larger and more prominent conversation, which ultimately led me to the Arctic. So that's kind of the whole connecting file on this thing about wandering all over the place in this. But it's been a really interesting journey, and it started with a local conversation that has resulted in a global awareness, and then how I can act locally within that global awareness.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you bring up a good point, too, because what I found, too, is when you try to talk to people about, hey, we need to do this, hey, we need to do that, if you come at them in a way where you're dealing in absolutes, like it's a yes or no, a lot of times people they don't like that. Yeah. But I think what you've done now what you've actually done now in the past, and what you're doing is a much more approachable way to affect these sorts of change, because you're developing these technologies, you're looking at it through a different lens, and you're bringing this new perspective to the table that a lot of people, while not entirely comfortable with it, are more open to it than the people that go up to them, hey, you need to stop eating meat, hey, you need to buy a hybrid, hey, you need to do this.
The guy grabbing you outside the grocery store.
Exactly.
Sign this petition.
Yeah, sign my petition.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because people, especially in this country, are very taken aback by that, because they see it as an encroachment on their freedoms.
Yep.
But I think, like I said, as we sort of march down this path to this climate climax, I guess, for lack of a better term, I think more and more people are definitely going to start finding themselves asking some of the same questions that you did when you were back at the Citadel, and even now here as we sit down and talk about these things.
Yeah, I agree, and I consider myself extremely fortunate to be here. Because I am surrounded by people who encourage exploration and conversation. There's no idea that's too ridiculous. In fact, as part of the Applied Design for Innovation program, which is very new and absolutely outstanding program, and Commander Davis and Dr. Blanken have done a great job of putting that together. When I first walked in the room and said, hey, Commander Davis, I'm really interested in bringing huge blimps back into the U.S. military, he thought about it very seriously for a moment, and then once he got done giggling about the idea of us going to war in huge blimps, which was not the intent, he took it very seriously, and he encouraged that conversation. And the same thing had happened with sustainable farming early on when I proposed that to my academic advisor in defense systems analysis, to Chad Seagren, and he said, this is really cool, this is very interesting, like I'd like to see what you can do with this. I ended up having to shift my thesis focus, obviously. But you're surrounded here by people who encourage intelligent conversation, and they encourage some I would say, not in some cases groundbreaking, but just, hey, this is a different perspective. And nobody's telling you this sucks. they're encouraging you to run it to ground and be ready to talk about it. And if you can be given a chance to put it in front of the right people, that's what NPS's culture is trying to drive towards, and has been very supportive of me, and I know many other students in doing that. So it's really fun and exciting to see how other students are driving this culture, and how faculty and staff are supporting and driving that culture as well, and how we are all moving towards being more sustainably focused and positive impacts without labeling ourselves as hippies or tree huggers or some other term that generally is not used in the military.
Right.
But I just think it's a wonderful environment to explore those opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. And I think on the flip side of the coin, where we're very fortunate to be in this fostering environment of all these new ideas, I think part of what we need to concern ourselves with is how we convey this to those outside of the postgraduate school environment. When we take these ideas and we bring them to, let's say, the Pentagon or some ENCODE or whoever, I think we really need to be conscious about, hey, how are we going to wrap this and highlight the benefits, not just to figuring it out for the sake of figuring it out, but the benefits of, hey, well, with your vertical and sustainable farming initiatives, let's put it on a warship. Let's compress this farm, this 3-acre farm, even further, and let's see if we can fit this onto a destroyer. Let's see if we can fit it onto an amphib. So when we're out in the middle of over the horizon, alone and unafraid, we can have that fresh fruits and vegetables. We can have, like you talked about, these microgreens, which are incredibly nutritious. And I mean, nutrition is the backbone of being able to get up at 2 a.m. and stand the watch or perform anything. And nutrition is the bedrock of being able to think straight, being able to operate at a high level. So I think those aspects of it really will carry this idea into the future, at least for the military. And then outside of the military, I mean, we need to think about how are we going to present this to whoever that you run into at the post office or the grocery store, just regular people out and about on their daily stroll or errands or whatnot. How are we going to sell the ideas we come up with here to them? Because we have the DoD that we have our ideas for, but if we can go even further and change the populace at large, how they do things, I think that's something really special.
Yeah, that's a really interesting conversation you bring up, and I know that there are a lot of folks here at NPS who are working very hard to understand and drive a brand for the school that encourages us to be the place to come to solve problems. And I don't think many people think NPS, container farming, awesome. That's not, it's not the connection they make. But one of the opportunities that I found, again, in an environment of, yes, keep going, was forming partnerships with industry or forming partnerships with academia. And so in the Arctic studies, there are a lot of academic groups out there doing this work already. And there's a lot of government-led organizations, and there's a lot of partner nations that are already doing research in the Arctic. And they're very open-armed to learning. They have very open arms to connecting with us and talking about this and continuing to put our resources and our capabilities and our thought leaders behind this. And the same thing can happen with a lot of these smaller sustainable solutions, and the ripple effects can happen much faster. In the case of sustainable farming, it would be easy to form, whether it's a CRADA, a creative research and development agreement, or a vendor demonstration agreement with some of these companies to say, hey, the military is interested in this, maybe bring it to campus, show us what we can do with it, and then figure out where it can kind of snowball from there. And again, I come back to that think globally, act locally. What are the little ripple effects that we can create here that make a big difference? And maybe someday we could put them on our surface fleet. Maybe someday they can go on the amphibs. Maybe someday they can go on submarines, and we're able to provide that farming. If we can do it on the International Space Station, we can probably do it on submarines if we, put the right people behind the opportunity. And so, as we talk about making this more visible and being able to tell people, what good things NPS can do aside from obvious warfighting functions, I see a lot of opportunity in being able to do that with private industry and academia, and NPS allows that collaboration to occur. And that doesn't happen everywhere else in the military, but the the opportunity to form those partnerships and relationships now and carry them with you down the line, I think is a tremendous opportunity here. And I'm grateful to the school for continuing to support it.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I mean, I know I'm looking forward to seeing what you come up with, because you've done some pretty cool stuff so far, and I'm looking forward to see where you go. So I just want to thank you for coming on the show.
No, thanks for letting me come on and kind of ramble for a little bit and kind of bounce around from topic to topic.
Sure.
But it's great to connect with other folks who are interested in sustainability and its application to the military, and just being able to just kind of work through these things as a team. Not having to do it alone and unafraid.
For sure. Awesome. Well, thanks again, and I definitely learned a few things today, which is always good.
Thanks, Mark.
I appreciate that.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us in the Trident Room. This episode was recorded April 30th, 2021. For more information about today's guests and topics, please visit the show notes. The Trident Room has been brought to you by the Naval Postgraduate School Alumni Association and Foundation. For questions, comments, and suggestions, please email us at tridentroompodcasthost@nps.edu and find us online at nps.edu/Trident Room Podcast.